The floor is yours, Roger.
Yes, I want to thank the organisers for doing this. I know it can be quite a big job. Yes, so defending full veganism. The reason for that is that there are different versions of veganism being promoted right now, which is a shame. One version restricts veganism to a diet. Tobias Leonhardt from ProVeg, for example, says that veganism is about food. There's also a slimmed down version of veganism, which suggests that veganism is for the animals, meaning non-human animals and non-human animals only. So I defend an expansive, full version of veganism in this talk. This is the version that we got from the people who founded the vegan social movement. In relation to the concept of speciesism, all of the people I will quote today were writing before Richard Ryder coined the word in 1970. He further spread the word in his first book called Victims of Science, 1975. So the people I cite today, I argue, these are from the 40s, 50s and 60s, laid some of the groundwork for people like Ryder and those who followed. So this is me. We can just concentrate on the academia part. My MA was about the British animal advocacy movement, and my PhD was about the support pillars of cultural speciesism. I always start with a caveat on these talks. The people who began the vegan social movement were not special or the first to do anything really, apart from coming together to form a social movement. That's what makes these people stand out. And of course, they were the people who named the movement veganism. I'll also be using their language from those times. And so you'll probably find it a little bit dated, but people are a product of their time. So we have to excuse them in that sense. So where to start? Two things dramatically shaped the emergence of the vegan social movement. War and a refusal from the Vegetarian Society. So we talked about the Second World War, so-called, but some of the pioneers also experienced the First World War as well. So Donald Watson, the best known of the co-founders of the vegan social movement, said that the experience was shattering. It had a real effect on them. Some became conscientious objectors, but in general terms, they were shattered by the experience. They thought that something had gone wrong with humanity, that we become a very violent species, and they concluded that vegan values were needed in order to get us out of a moral trough. When Elsie Shrigley and Donald Watson approached the Vegetarian Society, they were requesting a non-dairy section, and the vegetarians politely refused, which for veganism was a very good thing. I used to say that the beginning of the vegan social movement was rather chaotic, and that is still true to some extent, although what they achieved in their time in very difficult circumstances like rationing, for example, was really truly remarkable. They were ill prepared to operate a brand new social movement, and for many months virtually everything landed on the shoulders of poor old Donald Watson. He was the treasurer, the secretary, the figurehead, and the sole writer of the Vegan News, which became the Vegan Journal. Sociologist Matthew Cole provides a really excellent summary of the early years and the early aims of veganism. We're going to come onto that slide. But what we can say is that non-dairy vegetarianism was quickly left behind. As early as 1944, Donald Watson was talking about peace aims. The war was coming to an end. They were thinking about their future, and people had peace aims. And Watson argued that vegan values need to be central to that if the peace is going to be really peace. A year later, in 1945, Watson wrote this: "The object of the Vegan Society is to oppose the exploitation of sentient life." Seems clear to me that this rapid progress would not have been possible if they'd have just been a branch of the Vegetarian Society. By 1947, Watson was arguing that veganism represents the greatest peaceful revolution ever known. So this is Matthew Cole's summary, which is the only thing I'm going to read out in full. The vegan telos, the aim or the object, combines compassionate non-exploitation of other animals with an emancipated vegan self and a more compassionate human society. Vegan ethics from the beginning was directed towards these interconnected goals of transforming human beings and transforming human society, with both flowing from the foundational reconfiguration of human, non-human animal relations. So I hope that wasn't too much of an academic mouthful. So let's move on to the 1950s. This is from a document entitled Ripened by Human Determination, 70 Years of the Vegan Society, written in 2014, the same as Cole, by Jasmine Deboo, using research by Samantha Calvert, who is the communications officer, I believe, of the Vegan Society. The document points out that in 1949, Leslie Cross, another one of our founders, points out that veganism is not defined. So he said that's not really a problem right now in this very early stage, but it would be if they didn't do something about it fairly soon. And so they set to work on what would become vegan philosophy. So the definition so beloved by some animal activists begins here. The principle of the emancipation of animals from exploitation by man. It was quickly added to as the idea of veganism grew more and more expansive. This is one of the vegan journals from 1949. This is an attempt to discover the principle whose label is veganism and to suggest a tentative form of words which, as a short definition, closely describes it. It should be held in mind that the views expressed are of the writers, that's Cross, and in no way commits the society or other members. It's very early days. It would take another 6 years of thinking out loud in the pages of the Vegan before this process was finished. And it was finished basically in 1954 in a wonderful essay called The Surge of Freedom. So this is how it begins. This is an attempt to state in simple terms what veganism is and why and how it came into existence, and to suggest what it could mean for mankind. So as you can see here, it's grown, it's expanded from the early days. So the idea of veganism grew exponentially. There's still the one-line definition, so beloved by certain activist groups, but by now, Cross was arguing, and he did this by carrying out a lit review of sorts in the earlier publications, that veganism involves two broad aspects. In a nutshell, the first broad aspect, which I call the focus of veganism, is firmly and unshakably about human relations with our fellow animals. It has never changed, and it must never change, in my view. Cross said, however, that there's a second broad aspect, the scope of veganism. This not only exists, but it's very important. This is because ever since the 1940s, the pioneers of our movement believed that veganism was part and parcel of the moral evolution of humanity. Essentially, the pioneers of the movement said that they wanted humans to grow morally and to become animal liberationist. Cross addressed that twice. He said in 1951, "We are clearly on the side of the liberators." And in a different 1951 essay, he said, "Veganism is not so much welfare as liberation for the creatures and for the mind and heart of man." So this is more from The Surge. Why do we believe we should live without exploiting animals? To put the question in another form, why was such a doctrine formulated? The final, if not the immediate answer, is a revealing one, for it demonstrates the truth of the claim that veganism is not a mere side shoot in human evolution, but a central extending growth of considerable significance. This is the last from The Surge. I'm not going to read this, but essentially Cross here is talking about changes. He talks about slaughterhouses closing down. There's a very modern view about cows crying for their calves, for example. The changes which Cross says are obvious relate to the focus of veganism, and the changes not so obvious relate to the scope, which is talking about human moral evolution. In 2002, Donald Watson, who was 92 at the time, was interviewed by George Rogers, and he was asked really if he had any kind of message for the thousands of vegans who have joined the movement. So he answered, yes, I'd like them to take a broad view of what veganism stands for, you know, more than recipes, as it were. I would like them to realize that they're onto something really big. Now, this is a theme that he held until the end of his life. He didn't regard veganism as just another movement. He saw it as an overarching philosophy. As I said at the start, there are efforts to reduce the meaning of veganism, which I think is a shame. I think the expansive version of veganism is worth preserving. Now I want to address a criticism of the movement, which is often claimed to be white and male. And I need to start with an apology in the sense that time has limited me to talk about basically two people who are white and male. So sorry about that. Yeah, so the criticism about the whiteness is true. The criticism about the maleness is not true. There has always been very powerful, influential women in the movement. There are many now, and there were many then. I just want to highlight two. Kathleen Janaway, who served the society for many years, as did Eva Batt. And Kathleen Janaway then went on to found Movement for Compassionate Living because she wanted to concentrate on the ecological side of things. And Eva Batt, from my generation of vegans, was the person who publicized two cookbooks, but she also wrote a really good booklet in '64, which is called Why Veganism? So veganism is one thing and one thing only, a way of living which avoids exploitation, be it of our fellow men, the animal population, or the soil. And I want to end by pointing out that exploitation was the founders of our movement's favorite word, really. No words were banned, of course, but that's what they mainly concentrated on. At the moment, the movement is saturated in welfare, cruelty, talk. They didn't do it back then, and it would be good if we could go back to an expansive language as well as philosophy. And I normally cheat by asking the first two Q&A questions, but I'm done with my time, so I'll skip this part. So I'm quite happy to take questions. Thank you for listening.
Συνήθως ξεκινάει τις ερωτήσεις-απαντήσεις, το κομμάτι των ερωτήσεων-απαντήσεων, θέτοντας ο ίδιος τα δύο πρώτα ερωτήματα. Απλώς επειδή έχουμε βγει εκτός χρόνου, θα το αποφύγει και θα περάσουμε κατευθείαν στις ερωτήσεις του κοινού. Doctor, I see many comments thanking you for your presentation. I don't see a question for the moment, so you could go ahead and answer your own questions.
Okay. So
because I'm sure people seeing the questions right now want to know the answers.
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a cheat, but it gets things going. In terms of the first question, it's been claimed that we've done vegan education for decades and it's largely been a failure. This is not true. We haven't done vegan education for very long. It's a this century phenomena, and also there's not been much of it. I agree with Ronnie Lee. He's been vegan for 53 years, and he says that we need vegan education everywhere and all the time. And I do think that is a movement imperative. In terms of the second question, this is the sad part, really, in the sense that the radicalism of the pioneers didn't last very long. There were some potted histories in the vegan in the 1960s, and Leslie Cross, by that time, wasn't mentioned. So it was left to Donald Watson, really, to keep pleading with the movement not to forget its core founding values. So sociologists will say that when social movements grow and professionalize in particular, they tend to moderate. And sadly, that is what has happened to the vegan social movement. The same could be said, the kind of moderation of the concept of speciesism. It was popularized by Peter Singer, as our first speaker highlighted, which is a shame in a way, because it was popularized by Tom Reagan. He would have been associated with animal rights rather than animal welfare. So, you know, that's the problem with ideas. When they moderate, the real core of these ideas tends to disappear.